Now for today's program. Eetta Prince-Gibson is Moment's Israel editor and the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report. In addition to Moment, she also writes for The Forward, Foreign Policy, Haaretz, and the Religion News Service. Her award-winning stories have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Slate, Hadassah Magazine, and other prominent publications. She is a frequent lecturer on Israeli society in Israel and abroad. Joining Eetta today is Moment editor Sarah Breger. Sarah is also the director of Moment's Daniel Pearl Investigative Journalism Initiative. Sarah has won numerous awards, including first place for Religion Reporting of the Year from the Religion News Association and first place for Best In-Depth News Writing on Religion from the American Academy of Religion. Please welcome Eetta Prince-Gibson and Sarah Breger.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thanks for organizing this. Eetta, it is nice to see you. We're in contact all the time because of your great, Israel coverage for Moment. But I realized this morning that we haven't been on a Zoom together since the fall when you were discussing judicial reforms, which feels like a lifetime ago.
A lifetime ago.
So we're very happy to have you here. You recently wrote for us last week a really great piece that I recommend people read, and I'm guessing Suzanne is going to put it in the chat, about what winning means today. And you point out that there are signs everywhere in Israel that say, Biyachad ninatzeach, together we will win. And at the beginning of the war, it seemed clear in some ways what that meant, destroy Hamas, get the hostages back. And we were told by so many people that those two things were intertwined. I'm curious if that has changed over the past few months.
Yes, it's changed a lot. And first of all, there's a lot of public doubt if those two can even be combined. And moreover, if attempting to win isn't actually endangering the hostages, that the terrorists may decide to respond by killing the hostages. And so also that the only way it would seem that we'll be able to get any hostages is by some sort of an agreement, which is going to include a ceasefire. I think the argument in the street right now is which comes first and at what price of which. In other words, is it worth it if the hostages have to be sacrificed in order to win against Hamas? Is that valid? And there's a lot of discussion about that. I think at the beginning, maybe because we were so overwhelmed by what happened on October 7th, that we clung to some idea that there would be an Entebbe-like, spring in, get them all out on some sort of a magic carpet, and bring them home. And of course, it became clearer and clearer that that's not going to happen. To a certain extent, that was reinforced by the fact that Israel was able to pull out one soldier, one woman, very, very quickly. But no, they're not listed in the same order. You even have a cabinet minister who said the other day, no, that's not the most important thing. Releasing the terrorists is not, the hostages, I'm sorry, is not the most important thing, which has caused a storm.
Although I was surprised because I read a poll yesterday, I think from JPPI, that 40% of Israeli Jews would choose to oust Hamas over returning the hostages, as opposed to 25% who would choose to return the hostages. And I think the narrative in the media we've been seeing is that people want the hostages back at all costs, but it seems like that's not borne out.
No, I think people do. And I have to say that as somebody whose own research is qualitative, so I'll put in my personal plug, I don't think these questions are refined enough. What does that mean at the cost of not winning against Hamas? What exactly does that mean? I think we also know that people are genuinely very labile here. The mood changes. And it's also not something concrete. Remember, when that was asked, Hamas had just put out a list of demands that was so over the top that Israel would have no control over the Temple Mount. I mean, they just put out this list that was insane. So yeah, at what does at any price mean that will cancel the state? These are these questions that aren't refined at a time when thinking is so complicated and so emotional that I know that poll, it's not what you see on the streets. It's just not what you see on the streets. And it's certainly not what's being not only portrayed by the media, but the extent to which people are being interviewed by the media everywhere, including in the right-wing media. What was it like? What's it like not to have your kid at home? What was it like to be in hostage? Some of the hostages also are beginning to speak more. And as we hear more about what it was like for them, that may flip even more. Although some people might interpret that as therefore we really have to hit Hamas hard. These people. One other caveat to that poll is we don't know how many of them are alive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know that the number 136 is true. That's based on intelligence. But, for instance, somebody yesterday, the army told a family that they could have a funeral because someone who was a hostage has now been declared dead. So of the 136, what are the chances that a 1-year-old is surviving? We don't know. I don't know.
And you mentioned winning against Hamas. What is winning against Hamas at this point?
I don't know. I mean, as I said in the piece that I wrote, we're used to victory pictures. So I'm trying to think, are we going to see some, I said Ulysses Grant and Robert E. Lee shake, at a Potomac's courthouse for Americans, or Iwo Jima raising the flag, or the paratroopers at the Kotel at the Western Wall. No, I don't know what that image looks like. Because I think, and it's not by chance that none of us can think of what that image looks like. First of all, Hamas is an idea. It's just like you say about just because ISIS, hasn't bothered anybody too much in the West recently, doesn't mean that they're all gone away. It means that we're not paying too much attention to what's going on in other countries where there are blasts and explosions all the time. Hamas isn't going to go away. The question is what we're going to offer instead. I mean, I know what I would see as winning, which would be some sort of an arrangement that guarantees a future and that people can go back home. Wiping out Hamas, I think, will be a very, what's the word? Pyrrhic victory. In other words, we'll win, but what will we pay for that? There will be
when you say go back home, you're talking about the is displaced Israelis,
yes,
like
thank you. Yes.
over 100,000 who are displaced.
Well, there's over 100,000 from the north. From the south, they're all over. And because from the kibbutzim, they were by and large a stronger socioeconomic group. Some of them are going back to their kibbutzim. Many of them are with families, and they're not as displaced, or they stay together deliberately. In hotels or wherever. But at one point we hit 220,000 displaced people in the country, which is internally displaced. If we use international language, and the language of international humanitarian law, they are internally displaced because of war. Now, even though we have destroyed as much as we have of Hamas, they're still shooting over several times a week into the north, into the south. Today, they hit in the north and in towns that they had not hit before. They penetrated deeper with their, and again, they're not the kind of threats that were. I mean, we won that battle in that, no, they don't have the capability, apparently, of lobbing, unknown numbers for hours of missiles and keeping people in shelters for hours. Can they still disrupt life? Yeah, sure. And they are.
And I think, I mean, I think Netanyahu said recently, 75% of Hamas battalions have been destroyed. Is that true? And I guess what's the impact of that?
To both, I would say I don't know. I would not believe. First of all, never mind Netanyahu per se, and that of course is my opinion, not an objective fact. But in war, we should not believe numbers from leaders because they are meant to tell us things that they want us to know or hear or believe. I don't know what 75% of Hamas means. I don't know that we actually knew how much they had. The army has acknowledged that they were surprised by how many tunnels there were. There were many. The army said that officially, that there were many more tunnels and more extensive and more sophisticated than the army had realized. So 70% of what is a good question. And what does wiped out mean? As they've shown, my husband said when we were watching this on October 7th, we had this most sophisticated fence or wall, based on high tech, and they crossed it on golf carts and donkeys. So I don't know what wiping out battalions means.
And how are Israelis measuring or balancing the desire to win and then also the humanitarian costs?
Right now, I think with a sense of paralysis. I think there's a serious depression all over. Pidyon Shvuim, the saving or returning
captives,
of hostages, is a major commandment. And it's something that those of us who are in the army, but not only, grew up on. I mean, in the army, you don't leave people in the field, you do. And then we do have the Entebis and running after all sorts of, and releasing people. So that's very much part of the ethos. And it's very depressing. These two, particularly, I think the public is very focused on three. The two children, the Bibas children, one of whom had his first birthday in captivity, assuming that he had a birthday. They're redheads. They're carrot top redheads. And so they became very photogenic. And also the picture was taken of their mother holding them and the horror and fear in her eyes. And Josh Goldberg Poland, who is a dual American and Israeli citizen, who was taken with a very serious arm injury. Actually, it was blown off. And that was seen. Now, did he receive treatment for that? We don't know. We do know that the meds that were sent did not make it to the people. So we have people on chronic illnesses who are not receiving their medication. Apparently, several are, whether it's type 1 or type 2 diabetes. There's somebody with colitis, ulcerative colitis, not getting meds. So it's very discouraging. It's hard to balance. And it's hard to know what winning means. And every time you think it's getting better, there goes another missile. Hitting right now empty spaces, at least in the South, because everybody's gone. Making it much more difficult, I think, is the fact that the government isn't able to pull it together. The people who are in the hotels don't know what to expect. It's going to be one of the stories we're working on for Moment. The government is giving them very contradictory messages. For instance, they're going to open the schools in Sderot. In order to open the schools in Sderot, they are going to have the teachers do in-service trainings to know how. Great. Where are the kids going to be in school while the 2-week in-service training is taking place? This isn't happening over the summer. In the hotels, who's paying for the hotels beyond what date? None of this is clear. So that adds to the sense of how do you balance humanitarian and winning. It's kind of a feeling like you don't know what you're looking at. And I think that is probably the most prevailing feeling. What are we doing? What's going on? And does anybody have a plan?
Mhm. I mean, also with humanitarian, I'm also referring to, all the Gazans, over 30,000 Gazans who've been killed. Is there a point where you think Israelis are going to say, that this is enough? This is enough bloodshed. We have to have a different plan.
I think the narrative, I mean, the press, the foreign press, of course, pick up on anybody, like the parents who are saying, why should we give them humanitarian aid when they haven't even released our hostages?
Mhm.
The narrative here is very much that this is Hamas's fault. Hamas is using them while Hamas leaders are in the tunnels. Obviously, like in any war, those of us who are old enough may remember that in the United States and Vietnam, they gave body counts as signs of winning, body counts of course, Vietnamese, as a sign of how much we won today. How many people did we kill today? So I think there's a certain insensitivity. You don't hear anybody saying, yay, this many people got killed. What you do hear is, so tell Hamas and we'll stop. This is a tragedy. And I have to say for myself, yes, of course, I believe. I mean, it's very, very complicated. As somebody who's grown up in the kind of politics that I've grown up in, my default reaction would be to say, of course, you have a ceasefire. You stop fighting whenever you stop fighting, whenever you can. Give me a longer scenario than ceasefire. Ceasefire, how long and what are we talking about? And it becomes much more complicated. So while I don't think that there's a lack of sensitivity, and I think that the story that Israelis are not seeing what's happening in Gaza, sure they are. Everybody watches foreign television anyway. We do have cable TV, and we get Fox and CNN, and we
The
even get
internet.
yeah, and internet and MSNBC, and we watch I don't know, the Oscars, and we're there with the rest of the people. We do see it. And it's not only in the left-wing newspapers. What do we do about it is the problem. I think at some point also Israelis are going to come to recognition that the destruction isn't going to observe some sort of an imaginary border. I mean, that if there's going to be diseases that are going to be spread, the ecological disaster, a Somalia situation where people start just banging over to get in because they're hungry. On the other hand, and the other piece of this is everybody saying, where the hell is Egypt in this? Gaza has a border with Egypt. Egypt, for obvious reasons, is not interested in taking them, but that's not the point. So I don't think the public is as insensitive or as unkind and uncompassionate as we're being portrayed. I do think it's, what do you want me to do? Tell Hamas. Breaks my heart, but the other piece I think is that there's still so much shock. I think people are not aware of what it means, what October 7th meant here. I think it's still not penetrating. And think about something like 9/11, how long it took Americans not to think about, weapons of all sorts of things, and the press went for them too. Weapons of mass destruction, all sorts of things, and subsequently a lot of doubt was cast on these issues because you're so hurt and so bruised. And so whom are we talking about? The people who just rate this, the report just came out late last week by the Rape Crisis Centers, which is not so much new information as the information kind of collected and aggregated of what exactly happened. I would add one more piece, which is the sense that the world was very nice for about 2 days. The UN hasn't responded, the lack of sensitivity, the refusal to say by many organizations that it was Hamas, the inability to say humanitarian aid must go into Gaza and the hostages must be released. Why is that so hard to hold? There must be a ceasefire, and Hamas must pay for the crimes it committed, which are war crimes and crimes against humanity, and probably meet the condition of genocide, because they were against Jews, the Jewish people, according to the commands that they had. Why is it so hard to say? And there has to be a ceasefire, and there has to be some accounting for what was done to Israeli citizens. That also pushes you into a very defensive position. It's hard.
I mean, I was going to ask about, the international perspective. If we're talking about winning, it seems like Israel has lost the, international perspective, the international war.
We're always good at that. We win wars and lose them.
I mean, do Israelis care? Are they nervous that they don't have global support anymore?
Yes and no. I mean, what's sad or not is, of course, it all lines up according to your a priori position. And not that many people have really changed positions. In other words, if I think that Am levado yishkon, people alone shall dwell, then, or, kind of a Ben Gurion, shmoo, the UN, who cares? That kind of screw the UN. Then no. Also, remember, whom are we talking about? The world opinion. The world opinion is getting to be a little bit more autocratic and right-wing. And so as we look at that and say, well, I don't know if Trump gets elected, if this happens, if Orban stays, it's just, world opinion is complicated in that sense, even in assessing what world opinion means. Those of us who say we want to be a state because that means taking our place among the nations of the world, and that means mutual obligations, are very concerned. No, we don't want, I don't want to be a pariah. I mean, I'm not happy that if I travel, as I have in the past, twice in the past 2 months, that my Israeli passport goes really far down into my suitcase. As soon as I get out of, I was in Paris, and immediately just, and we don't speak Hebrew to each other. We're very careful to speak English to each other. It's not nice feeling like a pariah. And and the implications are serious. The implications of our economy, the implications of studying, of becoming whom we want to be, of being open to world experiences, of academia, all the things that make us who we are in many ways. I'm very concerned about that.
And where is the Israeli government in all of this? Are there I know how you feel about Netanyahu, but are there leaders that that you can look to or you trust?
Next question. No,
well, I guess silence speaks volumes.
Well, the answer is that there are people that I could in the government look at. There are people who joined the government to be part of the cabinet. They are not left wing. They are not my ideal candidates. I think what we're seeing right now is not just antipathy towards Netanyahu, which a majority of the country shares. The Likud does significantly better without him. His own party does significantly better without him. And there's no way that on a separate ticket he would be elected right now. I think what's becoming clearer, though, is some of the damage that was done, which is that appointing people into positions for political reasons when they have no capacity for handling the offices produces things like a minister of education who doesn't have his own skills, and of course politicized the upper level of the civil service. So what you have is people who are appointed because they're loyal to the political heads and incapable of managing. In normal times, many systems, many organizations and institutions kind of lumber along. In crisis, they can't. And so what you see is a lack of leadership across the board. You're seeing it in the health. One day they'll announce that there aren't enough doctors. But you won't hear a response from the health ministry about what are we doing about that. How many doctors are elderly, and that there's going to be and you don't hear a response. So what the government is doing is producing mixed messages, just not on top of it, not meeting with the parents, with the family members of the hostages. If they do, they pick the ones. Netanyahu will meet with the ones he wants to meet with, that he thinks will do well. We do not hear plans. The Bank of Israel today, I believe, or yesterday, did not raise interest. As somebody who's not interest rates, as somebody who's not an economist, I'm hearing lots of pundits tell me what that means and why, and is it a good idea, is it a bad idea? I'm not hearing a minister of finance who's independent. The bank is independent, of course, of the minister of finance. Tell me what that means. How's the government dealing with that? So it's a very sad situation. What we're seeing is what happens when Netanyahu, for political reasons, appointed people who then appointed people, and how deeply this is infiltrated. Of course, the other part is that can be switched very quickly because it's entire layers that can be switched.
Well, in terms of Netanyahu, what do you think he views winning as? Not, I would say not going to jail, but there's probably more.
That is what I was going to say. Yeah, and redeeming his name in history, and not being the one who presided over Israel's worst failure since its existence, in the time of its existence. There was just a big piece in the paper today in Haaretz that the army was showing the plans for the Independence Day celebration. Now, we always have a big celebration, and it's a formal with the army marching, and some people love it, some people think it's kind of a hoot. It's kind of fun, and uniforms do that, that kind of thing, but don't take it too seriously. What they've done, what the army has deliberately leaked, of course, is that it's over the top, pompous military victory. And even the army doesn't want to do it. Netanyahu wants to do that. By the way, until Netanyahu, the prime minister, never spoke at those ceremonies. Only the president, because it was never supposed to be a divisive or partisan. Netanyahu speaks now. And so the sense of he just is promoting this, we're going to win, all these words of winning, victory, wiping out, crushing, military displays. If there's anything I can think of that seems, I can't even think of it as a hoot, and then the fireworks are really fun, and everybody goes out, and especially in Jerusalem, because you have so many hilltops, you can just go anywhere and see all the fireworks everywhere. And whatever you think and whatever your political position is, you can always at least get into that a little bit. I can't imagine how he thinks he can pull that off, but that seems to be where he's at.
And in terms of his government, or in terms of the government, where do all these, very right-wing ministers fit into the idea of winning? Because it seems like we're seeing their idea of winning is perhaps very different from what Israeli society views as winning.
Yeah, well, again, when what you have is lots of words that you're not quite sure what they mean, it's also hard to know. winning means crushing Hamas. I don't know what that is. I'm not trying to be, rhetorical or provocative. I don't know what that means. Hamas is an idea as well as an organization, and ideas don't die that quick, as we know. They certainly don't die when people feel completely vanquished. So I don't know what that means. The right-wing ministers are just using the same words, but more of them and harder. And it was Smotrich, who is one of the right-wing ministers, who said that bringing back the hostages isn't the most important thing. He backtracked on that and said, how can you say one is more important than the other? But if you actually listen to the recording on the radio, it was said very clearly, it was said very, actually in a moment of calm. He's very explosive, but this was in a moment of calm. And so that's the problem. We also have a problem now, for instance, with the Ramadan, which is coming up next month. And Ben-Gvir, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the Minister of Internal Security, has decided that Israeli citizens, Muslims who are Israeli citizens under the age of 40, will not be allowed to go up on the Mount to pray. Now, first of all, it probably won't hold up in the Supreme Court, which is, of course, why they fought the Supreme Court. This is going to be an exact example of why they don't want the Supreme Court and why people like me said, but that's exactly what we need against a majoritarian democracy, and certainly against an extreme democracy that isn't democratic towards 20% of its citizens. That's not a democracy. So we're all concerned that what the right is doing is also lighting fires within Israel. Mm-hmm. The Arab population of Israel has been extremely quiet, helpful, volunteering all over the place. It's not getting a lot of writing. I have written about it. Working, picking vegetables. It's not, people are going and picking vegetables. It's not unusual to go pick vegetables and find a Palestinian from within Israel, a citizen, picking beside you. But not letting them pray on the Temple Mount is asking for trouble. So what do they mean by victory? I'd also ask victory over whom? I'm very concerned that what the right thinks is that this is an opportunity for an overall win in the West Bank, in Israel proper, and of course in Gaza. And you can add Lebanon into it for, just for the addition of making it more complicated. Remember, there was a conference about a month ago of people who want to go back to settle in Gaza. There were 15 members of Knesset and 6 to 8 cabinet ministers there. That's a pretty heavy statement. And I apologize if anybody's hearing a phone in the background. No, okay.
I mean, how possible is that? I think I am thinking about this Gaza resettlement plan. Is that something that could happen? Even if I see polls that the Israeli public doesn't want it, but if the government is in charge, is that possible?
Will they go up again? Well, it's interesting because even within the settler movement, it's not 100%. I'd like to dismiss the whole thing as crazies. But as somebody who's often been in the minority of ideas and things, I love to quote Margaret Mead, who says, never underestimate what the change, I'm paraphrasing the quote, of course, but, the change that a small group of people can make. In fact, it's the only thing that brings change. And I paraphrase that, and somebody in our listeners probably knows it better. So to completely dismiss highly motivated, highly funded, including from American Jews, that's where most of their funding comes from. I'd be loath to dismiss that be so cavalier. We were pretty cavalier about them in 1973 and 4 and 5 when they first started, and just a bunch of people dancing in Hebron, and what's that got to do with it? And now look at the West Bank. So, are they serious? Yes. There are families ready to move. There is money. They have, they are organized, and they're willing to rough it. They're willing to be without water and without electricity, and and no sewage for as long as it takes. They're excited. How many are they? At the conference, they were very excited that there were 5,000 people. I was thinking, you bust in people from all over. Jerusalem was insane in terms of traffic because of the buses coming in that didn't know the routes of the city. And were causing all sorts of traffic jams from the north. And the best you could do was 5,000? Really? Most of them young men, who were dancing and singing, and it was very powerful. They are very serious. How serious should we take their movement? I'd love to say, don't be silly. But, they say that prophecy was given to fools. Or, it's really hard to predict, especially about the future. And I think they do have government support.
Mm-hmm. I mean, thinking about the future, a lot of winning is tied into this idea that comes up the day after. What are we going to do the day after? What do you think Israelis see as the day after in Gaza? Who would they like to be in charge?
Mm-hmm. It again, it's completely dependent on your pre-existing political position. So if somebody who believes in a two-state solution, however you configure that, then I'm going to tell you that I want to see this. If somebody who believes in the greater land of Israel, then I'm going to tell you that. I think that what everybody, or certainly the majority, thinks is some sort of a de-Hamasification of the public service, at least. And we saw what happened with UNRWA, with the welfare. I mean, and this is something that, although I'm not a fan of blaming and that kind of the whole world is against us position, we've known this for a long time, that the UN in Gaza was deeply invested in Hamas. You can't build a school and have people build tunnels that you enter through your school and not know about it. Let's not be. So I think that one is we see some sort of a civilian or civil whatever, maybe a Marshall type plan, although I think that's not realistic given the world economy and given how much the world isn't there and how bitter many of the Western countries are about how much money they pumped into Gaza and where it didn't go, which is it didn't go to hospitals and schools and health. I think people very much would like to see, again, the center and center left, some sort of a confederation, some sort of a separate entity that would cooperate with Israel. What most people do not want to see, and I know that there are polls on this, is an Israeli occupation where we would reestablish a civil administration, and we would once again, as we were in the West Bank and still are in certain parts, responsible for welfare and all of that. Expanding the occupation into Gaza is a bad idea. This all depends, and that's part of the reason that it's such a wild card, is on world cooperation, on world involvement, on world engagement. It's one thing to say ceasefire now, and then what? The humanitarian aid that did go in largely did not reach Gazans. I'm not talking about the stuff the medications that were supposed to go to the hostages. So where's Europe going to be in this? Where's the global South going to be in this, if anywhere? I might add, and this is something that's coming up more and more in think tanks and groups that I know I'm part of, is to also think beyond security and the borders and sovereignty, and who's into inclusive security. If we don't, they didn't have great hospitals anyway. We were bringing people to Israel. I think many of you know about the road to recovery, which, by the way, is not going on obviously in Gaza, but it's still going on from the West Bank.
Can you just explain what that is for a second?
The road to recovery is that Israelis will pick up mostly children, but not only, who need medical treatment in Israel, because that kind of treatment is not available in the West Bank or even before the war in Gaza. Drive them to the medical facility and then drive them home or to the crossing. With a family member, if it's a child, then the family member can get in. If not, why am I bringing that up when you asked about what's the day after? Because I think that if we don't think of these kinds of things, the Gazans will have so little to benefit from any kind of peace agreement, that at least being energized and moved to say we're going to win, which is what they're doing as well, is better. We know it worked in Germany. The Marshall Plan worked. And so the day after, I think, has to include what we call inclusive security, which means attention to people's lives and not just borders and, whose boots are going to be stomping around, making sure that there's some sort of order. And not that I'm minimizing the importance of not having violent conflict, but if you don't have hospitals and education and a sense of hope and a sense of a future, then what does it all mean anyway? So there are think tanks beginning to think this through right now, what the day after has to include. A lot of look at UN Security Resolution 1325, which people know mostly calls for the involvement of women in all security and international negotiations, which of course we're seeing a lot of not right now, certainly not among the Palestinians, but not among us either. I mean, I read a lot about all these men wearing black Uniqlos. I'm not sure why Uniqlos became the thing, but they all wear Uniqlos or knockoffs, and they don't think that way. Asking a bunch of generals who spent their lives fighting each other in any two countries to then think about peace, the only thing that they're going to think about is how to prevent the other guy from killing you, because that's what they did. And that's important. I want to know how children are going to grow. I want to know how they're going to get fresh vegetables and who's going to clean up the water system. And that has to be part of the day after.
I think it's interesting. When you were talking, you didn't mention the PA at all. Are they just a non-factor?
Well, the PA as it is now is a non-factor. Who, again, what does that mean, the PA? For the PA to take over Gaza is also very complicated. I mean, who are we talking about? Which leaders? Once again, the current government in the West Bank is again predicated on this fight with Israel, kind of, yes, peace, but also a second intifada. So if that's what we're looking at, Mahmoud Abbas isn't making anybody feel great, and then every so often he'll come out with a comment about the Holocaust didn't really happen, and then you'll say these are the people we're supposed to have peace with. I mean, seriously. So in theory, sure, it could be a PA. It could be a what Biden has talked about, which is some sort of a restructured PA Palestinian Authority, that it has to have indigenous people and local people. I think one of the mistakes that was often made by the UN and other countries has been to employ their own people rather than employing local people. That was a mistake. I know one place that I know of, because it was Haiti. Using a lot of internationals. One, locals need the jobs, but they know they have a different kind of knowledge. They may not be able to read maps. But they know what life is about, and where the hills are, and when it rains, where the floods start, and all sorts of things that really matter. So the PA could certainly do that if it were open. The Palestinians certainly have a level of well-trained, create a kind of what they like to call a technocratic government. I think that's a terrible name, but it would be a professional government dealing with professional issues. Sure, it could be the PA. It could be, as far as I'm concerned, Europeans that would hand it over, kind of like as a mandate. Anything that would allow the people to have their own self-government within a reasonable amount of time that would be leading to a better life.
I want to turn to questions, but before I want to ask one question about Haredim. Are we reaching an inflection point as they continue to not serve? It seemed like at the beginning, there are articles, more Haredim are serving, but it seems not to be the case now.
No, there was a little bit of noise at the beginning, and I think it was a total of 1,000 Haredim who enlisted. Yes, but there's two possible inflection points. There may be an inflection point within the Haredi community. I think that Haredim themselves are not enjoying becoming the pariahs of Israeli society. Some are happy. We don't want, if you look at some of the real closed, mostly the Hasidim, the closed sect, we don't want to be part of the larger world, etc. But there's so much rage. Even and not only that, it's become so like just part of, it's so prevalent in how we think. So somebody was trying to encourage, somebody put out, we love WhatsApps here, so I'm supposed to say WhatsApp, right? But we call them WhatsApps. So everybody is setting up WhatsApp, go vote, and put out the difference in percentages in voting in the ultra-Orthodox communities in Jerusalem versus the secular, liberal, and Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox communities. And then, of course, the response immediately by everybody was, but that doesn't count because we have so many people, they have everybody at home. Half of our people are voting in the army. And so, of course, they're not appearing at the polls. They're they're not here. There's only so long that bitterness will continue. Another part of that, though, is the money. The government decided to honor its obligations of what we call coalition monies, which are part of the coalition agreements. We have towns and cities in the south and in the north that are devastated. Apparently, obviously very few people, and I certainly have not been up to it, but like a kibbutz like Manala, which is a very veteran kibbutz, has been wiped out. The people are not there. They were evacuated long ago, but the buildings are all gone. They just keep on getting hit by Hezbollah. Who's going to rebuild? And the Haredim are just taking their money back that was promised to them. Who's going to pay for all the PTSD and trauma? And what about all the soldiers who are wounded? We're hearing about those who are killed. What about those who are wounded? What about those who are going to need rehab for many, many, many years? School children who are going back to schools in towns where they were evacuated, like from Sderot, in their diapers. Who's going to pay for this? And the Haredim are demanding the money that it was promised to them. That's even worse than the insensitivity, the arrogance. I'm not sure where the inflection will come, the point will come first, within their own community or within between the two communities. I would look at both.
So let's turn to a few questions. We have a few minutes.
I see a lot of them, yeah.
A lot of good questions. Someone's asking, how likely is it that there'll be an early election this time around?
I don't know. Netanyahu is insisting certainly not until his term is up. On the other hand, because the polls are they're not doing well, all he needs is 5 people to defect in his party. It's a little bit like the Republicans in the United States, and then the government falls. Do I think that that Netanyahu will agree to early elections? Absolutely not. But he could be destabilized. There could be violence in the streets. The soldiers are going to start coming home at some point. They're already coming home in order to go back. They've thinned out the troops so that people can go back in. So after you served 100 and some days, or like, my son who served, I guess, 80 or so, you're released in order to go back in a few months later. As these people, many of them, if they're self-employed, their businesses are destroyed. They may not have homes to go back to physically. They have families that are, go explain to a child that daddy went to the army or mommy went to the army. By the way, we have an awful lot of women in Miluim right now in reserves. To the child, daddy abandoned or mommy abandoned. What's war when you're 3? So you're going to see an awful lot of instability coming up. How much that could lead to actual violence or real demands for the government to call for elections, Bibi won't agree to it, but his party might.
And connected to that, someone asked what your view on Benny Gantz is.
Well, when you asked about whom we trust, it's better. He's better. Right now, he's being a fig leaf for Netanyahu. Of course, the argument is it is always better to be. Is it better to be within and try to affect what's going on? Certainly, or to be out. Certainly, he provides a veneer of legitimacy and normalcy and what's the word I want? Evenness and being well considered that Bibi's government doesn't have. Would I think of him for a prime minister? Not happily, but certainly better than anything else I can think of.
And there are a few questions about the 2-state solution. Is it sunk? Is it possible?
I don't think it ever sunk. I think that there's one of the interesting things is that when people say 2-state solution, and I'm back to, inclusive security, and in some of the groups, the 2 groups, one at Van Leer that I'm part of, we say, I don't care if it's 27 states, tell me how we're going to live. And what exactly does that mean? And also, so when you see the voting, the polls, Israelis are against the 2-state solution. Of course, they're against it. What does it mean? I don't even know what it means. How do you say, yes, I'm in favor of something that doesn't make sense and has no contours, has no lines, has no borders, has no nothing? There are lots of newer ideas. They're being called confederated. Some of you may have seen a land for all peoples. They are different in the extent to which they recognize sovereignty. But they have all sorts of ideas of how people will be able to move, not have to move, be able to, even within Jerusalem, I've worked on a project for a long time that we are working on Jerusalem as geographically unified and politically divided. So that means you would live in Jerusalem anywhere, but would have different citizenships. And I know that sounds maybe crazy to people, but they might want to look at what happened to Basel, which is German, French, and Swiss. And not all of them are even Switzerland is even part of the EU. And yeah, it's a little complicated when you cross into the airport where you go, because this is the Schengen agreement and the disagreement. And they're cross-border areas in areas like the former Yugoslavia. There's a couple of cross-border areas in the area of northern Italy. Those kinds of areas. So when you say a two-state solution, I don't think it's dead. I think it has no content right now. And I'm very concerned, once again, that what Biden is doing is the same thing, is let's give it a name. Let's divide it up. It sounds good. You get yours, we get ours. We'll split we'll split the land because there's two of us and none of us going nowhere. Without content. Without budgets, without tax ideas, all sorts of, again, what does that mean? I don't think the idea ever ended. And by the way, a lot of the ideas don't come from here. The people calling for a one-state solution and all of that are mostly abroad. And I think in that sense, I would quote my colleague and friend, Habitat, who's Israeli Palestinian, Israeli Arab, however you want to call him, who talked about this was when we still thought Vivian Silver was alive. He was born in Kalansoa, was educated in Israel and in the United States. He is co-director of a very prominent Jewish Arab group. And he said that his 80-year-old aunt was fleeing in Gaza, and 17 members of his family had been killed. We're talking November. He had worked for years with Vivian Silver. And the thought of her being in captivity, we now know she was dead, but was more than he could think of. And he knew many of the children because they were the children of his colleagues who were fighting in Gaza. And he was worried for these kids because he knows them. And he said, what part of that do you want to take away? When you say Palestine from the river to the sea, where does that leave me? I'm both. And just like many Jews would want to have the state of Israel, but not necessarily live in it. There are Palestinians who want the identity, or Irish who want Northern Ireland to be Ireland and not Britain. That doesn't mean they're moving to Belfast. I think that there are many Palestinians who want within Israel, who are loyal to the state of Israel, believe in the state of Israel, like their lives here, or would like them if they were more equal, but want a Palestinian state. So no, in a word, I think it's very alive. My concern is what the content of it is, and that not a bunch of men who don't, really live in day-to-day life, or generals who think in military terms, and that includes on the Palestinian side as well, are going to divide up. A two-state solution isn't just where we put a border. That can't be all it is. And what? And they do their thing and we do ours? That isn't a two-state solution. That's a guarantee for trouble.
It looks like I think we need to end here. There are a lot of good questions still out there, so maybe we'll do a part 2 in the near future.
Sure.
But thank you, Eetta, very much for taking the time.
Thank you all for listening.
And please sign up for next week's Zoominar. Bye, everyone.